Maureen Clark's mornings began while the world was still asleep. In the dark hush of Manchester's rainy streets, she buttoned her navy cleaner's uniform with practiced ease, her fingers stiff from the cold, despite the kettle's rising steam. The radio murmured weather reports and bits of outdated news background noise to the clink of spoon against chipped mug. She didn't rush. She never did. Life had taught her to be steady. While the city stirred reluctantly under the gray cast of dawn, Maureen trudged out into another day. Boots slick against the pavement, the damp seeping through like it always did. At the care home after her cleaning shift, she moved through corridors where others hurried, her pace calm, precise. She'd pat the hands of the lonely residents, remember their preferred biscuits, their children's names, birthdays they hadn't celebrated in years. Maureen said little, but when she did, her voice softened like worn cloth. Her strength came not from volume but from constancy. Pauline teased her every week. "You'll wear yourself into the flooring, love. You need a bit of fun." Maureen would smile thin-lipped and tired, but smile all the same. "Fun's expensive, Pauline. I'll settle for peace and a warm bath." Despite the ache in her knees and rough skin from harsh cleaning fluids, Maureen never complained. Not about the hours, the loneliness inside the house once Daniel moved out, or the creeping silence that filled their tiny living room since. Letters came less frequently, calls even more so. Still, Maureen kept Daniel's graduation photo on the mantel, polished weekly like a shrine. When the neighbors asked after him, she answered with pride well-practiced, firm. "He's doing grand down in London, busy, working hard. That boy's always been destined for bigger things." In private, she would run a thumb along the picture's glass edge, the weight of his absence heavier than she'd admit. Old Mr. Jacobs from next door often said, "Your lad's lucky, Maureen. Not many mums would do what you've done, not like this." Maureen would only nod and reply, quiet and sure, "Let's hope he remembers then." Daniel closed the boot of his sleek black car with a thud that echoed down the quiet Surrey cul-de-sac. The late autumn air held a damp chill, the kind that crept in unnoticed until it tightened cold fingers around your spine. Inside, Catherine stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a neutral expression just one muscle twitch away from disdain. "So, that's it then?" she asked, her tone carefully balanced between incredulity and indifference. Daniel turned, one hand on the car door. "She's had a stroke, Kath. I need to be there." "What about the trustee dinner next week? And Lily's term review?" Daniel hesitated, glancing toward the front room window where Lily's small face watched, half-curtained behind floral drapes. Her brow was furrowed, uncertain. "I'll bring her back for the review," he said, quieter now. Catherine didn't rep. Lee. Instead, she stepped back, the door slowly swinging without farewell. Daniel didn't wait for it to close. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against his palms, and turned the ignition. The engine's hum filled the silence Catherine left behind. As they drove northward, the pristine suburbs unraveled into motorways, the manicured hedges replaced by gray concrete ribbons and crisp-stained service stations. Lily sat in the back, arms wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, watching landscapes shift. "Daddy?" she asked softly around Birmingham. "Is Grandma going to die?" The question was a dagger, clean and honest. Daniel blinked hard, focusing on the road. "No, sweetie. She's poorly, but we're going to see her. Being there might help her get better." Lily nodded, unconvinced, and leaned her head against the window. When Manchester's skyline finally edged into view, under a bruised dusk sky, Daniel's stomach sank. He hadn't been back in years. These streets, once second nature, felt like lines from a dream half remembered. Outside Pauline's modest terraced house, the porch light glowed. She opened the door before they reached it, face lined with relief and reprimand. "Took you long enough," she said, but there was no malice in it. Daniel nodded, too tired to defend himself. Inside, the kettle was already boiling. The air smelled of carpet cleaner and familiarity. And despite everything grief, shame, fear, it almost felt like coming home. Daniel smoothed down the sleeves of his tailored jacket, the crisp navy wool sharp against the soft buzz of party chatter. Chandeliers gleamed overhead in the grand Whitmore drawing room, where cream paneling met polished wood and the air smelled faintly of champagne and eucalyptus. Laughter trilled around him like crystal wind chimes. Catherine stood at the far end, glass in hand, the picture of elegance in her ivory sheath dress. Her father held court by the fireplace, recounting campaign tales with performative charm, while assorted guests nodded in approval. Daniel caught Snippet's policy, donors, a minister's faux pas at the boating club. He laughed when expected, smiled on cue, but something heavy pressed against his chest. Next to him, Lady Whitmore, the title, adopted more by manner than law, let out an indulgent chuckle. "Of course your mother couldn't attend something like this," she said breezily. "All that travel, and, well..." She gave him a glance dipped in pity and mild cruelty, the kind that made him feel 6 years old again in scuffed trainers. He offered a thin smile. "She's never been one for parties." "No," Catherine added, turning to refill her glass. "Your mother prefers practical things, doesn't she? Salt of the earth and all that." Daniel swallowed. Their voices rolled off polished tongues, each syllable honed to precision, but inside they grated. Later, as they posed for a family photo, Catherine glowing, her parents poised, Daniel stood apart. It wasn't in just the tailored suit or the backdrop. It was the way his laughter felt forced, the silence between flashes, when no one asked about his upbringing because no one cared to hear. The next morning, he found Maureen's text sent hours before the party, unread. "Hope tonight goes well. Tell Catherine's mum I said thanks for the Christmas card. Love you, son." There was no response from him beneath it, just pixels. Silence. He stared at the screen for a long while. Outside, the frost clung to the Surrey hedges like a whisper, delicate and cold. Inside, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen counter, fingers resting on the phone. The Whitmore name had opened doors. But in that moment, all he wanted was to go home, and he had no idea how to get there. The envelope was cream, thick, expensive, the sort of stiff cardstock that rustled with pretension. Maureen turned it over in her hands, her name written in looped black cursive. Maureen Clark, Manchester. No first name informality, no warmth, just proper, distant, polite. Pauline leaned across the kitchen table, peering at it over her mug. "Go on then, open it." Maureen shrugged, setting down her chipped teacup. Her hands, still roughened from years of bleach and Brillo pads, fumbled slightly with the delicate paper. She extracted the embossed card slowly, carefully, like handling something fragile or foreign. "You are cordially invited to the Whitmore Clark Christmas Gala. December 24th, 7 p.m. Address in Surrey" followed. Dress, formal. That's it?" Pauline narrowed her eyes. "No note from Daniel?" Maureen shook her head. "No." They sat in silence. Outside, children shrieked faintly, their laughter peppered by the thump of footballs and the distant hum of buses trailing along Whitmore Street. Maureen finally spoke. "I suppose it's kind of him to invite me." Pauline sniffed. "Kind?" "Maureen, it's a formality. Probably his wife's idea, his PR manager." She softened. "You don't have to go, love." "I know," Maureen said quietly. "But I will." Surrey shimmered with detached elegance. The Housemore estate really loomed grand and aloof. Maureen had borrowed a navy dress from Pauline and worn her best coat. Still, she felt conspicuous as she walked up the drive alone, her boots catching gravel like an unwelcome reminder of where she was from. Inside, laughter echoed off vaulted ceilings. She spotted Daniel across the room, looking polished and exhausted. His smile when he noticed her faltered just slightly, just long enough. Catherine emerged by his side, all silk and calculation. "Maureen," she greeted, air-kissing the air beside her. "We're delighted you could make it." "They've got the posh wine glasses," Pauline would later joke. "The kind that's all stem and no substance." Later, in a conversation she wasn't meant to overhear, a guest asked Catherine, "That was his mother, wasn't it? From Manchester?" The reply? A whisper laughed. "Yes. Isn't it sweet? It's like a little char." Eddie outreach. Maureen left early, her name never formally excused, her presence never acknowledged beyond the necessary. On the train north, she watched the English countryside blur past, hands folded calmly on her lap. She didn't cry. She rarely did. But she felt it settle in her chest, the weight of being both invited and unwelcome. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks for the third time, the silver glinting under the chandelier light. The Whitmore estate sparkled in frost-tipped elegance, lit with candles and carefully hung garlands, the smell of pine mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Laughter echoed from the drawing room, where Catherine held court amidst polished friends discussing gallery funding and autumn in Venice. Daniel glanced at the hallway mirror. He barely recognized the man in the reflection. Faultless shirt, muted accent, his mother's vowels long ironed out like a crease in memory. He found Maureen standing awkwardly beside a coat rack that looked like it cost more than her yearly wage. She clutched the biscuit tin she insisted on bringing, homemade shortbreads, shaped like stars, sugar-dusted and neatly arranged. "Ma'am, can I take your coat?" a sharply dressed usher asked. "Oh no, love, I'm fine," Maureen mumbled, already shrinking. Daniel approached, heart tight. "Mum," he whispered, barely hugging her, "glad you made it." Her eyes scanned the gold trimmings, the polished harpsichord, the snifters of brandy. "Posh," she said, "posher than I pictured." He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well, Catherine likes a bit of ceremony." They entered the drawing room, the temperature dropping like a shift in air pressure. Catherine's eyes flicked to Maureen's coat-worn wool, a safety pin at the collar end, then to the biscuit tin. "Oh," Catherine sang lightly, "you brought treats. How charming." Maureen smiled and placed them on a side table, brushing crumbs from her pinky finger. Later, Daniel noticed the tin had been moved to the sideboard, unopened. No one offered her tea. Catherine chatted loudly about ski resorts. Maureen sat on an edge of an ottoman, next to nobody. Daniel watched her from across the room, a little stooped, fingers folded tight, smiling too often at things she didn't understand. When he asked if she was all right, she simply said, "Tired, love." She left before dessert. No scene, no goodbye, just a pale scarf forgotten on the banister. Catherine didn't notice. Or perhaps she had. But when Daniel bent to pick up that scarf, the warmth remaining on the wool ran colder than any snow that might have fallen that night. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted lilies. Machines hummed a quiet rhythm beside Maureen's narrow bed, charting the slow, steady beat of a heart that had carried more than its share. The curtains were pulled back to let in the gray Manchester light, dulling the world to soft edges. She sat propped up in her pillows, a knitted shawl from Pauline draped over her shoulder. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to lift a teacup. Daniel, sitting close, caught it before she could spill. He didn't speak, not yet. He hadn't spoken much at all in the past week. Most of their communication came from glances and nods, half-formed words traded in quiet moments. Sometimes Maureen would close her eyes for long stretches, not quite asleep, not entirely awake, and Daniel would read allude books she used to keep by the boiler back home. Other times they just sat, the silence heavier than speech. Pauline had come by earlier that morning with Mr. Jacobs, bringing custard tarts and half-hearted jokes. Now, it was just them again. In the corner, Lily sat crisscrossed with her school workbook, casting occasional glances at her dad and grandma. Maureen's hand brushed Daniel's. Her fingers, so strong, rough with years of scouring and folding and lifting now, pressed soft and hesitant. "I were not ashamed of you," she murmured, her voice slurred but deliberate. Daniel blinked, caught the words like they were soap bubbles, fragile and drifting. "I know," he said, voice cracking. "I was ashamed of me." It was the closest he'd come to apology since arriving. Maureen didn't nod. She didn't need to. Outside, rain began its gentle patter against the windows. The kind of rain she used to call soft, rain enough to soak you slow without you noticing. He leaned over, kissed the edge of her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. I'm sorry it took me so long." Maureen's lips curled, faint and tired but real. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like it. In the quiet, Lily looked up and said, "Grandma, will you come to my play?" Maureen gave the barest smile and blinked once deliberate. "Yes." And in that small gesture, the longest journey began to close. Pauline was folding a pile of towels when the phone rang its tinny chime, piercing through the low buzz of daytime television and the hum of the washer overhead. She glanced at the clock. 11:14 a.m. Decent enough to be bad news, not early enough to be casual. When she answered, the voice on the line was hospital flat. "Miss McKay, it's about Maureen Clark. She was brought into the Manchester Royal Infirmary this morning. Stroke, she's stable for now." Her lungs emptied in one sharp exhale. "I'm coming." 20 minutes later, she was in the ward's waiting room, the kind painted in calming shades on a public budget. Maureen lay beyond the double doors, suspended in a sterile rhythm of beeps and breath. Pauline hadn't seen her like this in 30 years, not since the kitchen fire, when they'd been teenagers, and Maureen had sat shell-shocked with soot-blackened cheeks, cradling a kettle like it was precious. She clasped her phone with shaking fingers. And then she made the call she should have made, 4 years ago? 5? It rang twice. Daniel Clark speaking. Pauline's voice wavered, unfamiliar to her own ears. "You need to come home." Pause. "Emin da. Pauline, is everything all right?" "No." Space hollowed itself around the word. "It's your mum. She's had a stroke. She's in hospital." He didn't answer at first. She imagined him, sleek-suited and preoccupied, somewhere between a Starbucks and a shareholder meeting. "God," Daniel said finally, voice lowering. "Is she? How bad is it?" "Bad enough. And no one else even knows how to reach you anymore. She's barely speaking, but she said your name." There was a rustle on the line, the clink of something glass. A murmured, "Sorry, I have to step away," to someone nearby. "I'm getting the next train," he said, suddenly breathless. Pauline didn't thank him. "You should have called before now." "I know." She hung up. Back in the ward, Maureen lay unmoving, eyes closed beneath the fluorescent sting. Pauline took her hand gently, her own thumb tracing creases worn by years of hard work and worry. "Your boy's coming," she whispered. And for the first time since arriving, Maureen stirred. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Daniel sat stiffly in the hospital waiting room, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. Around him, coughing, the rustle of leaflets, the shuffle of nurses' shoes over linoleum. Everything was sterile, far removed from the plush silence of Surrey. Pauline stood across from him, arms folded, jaw tight. "Took a stroke for you to show your face, did it?" Her voice wasn't raised, if anything. It was quieter than usual, but each word landed with precision. Daniel looked up, dark circles under his eyes. "I came the second I heard." "Seconds. Years. Same difference when your mum needed you." He swallowed, shoulders sagging. "I didn't mean for—" "You didn't mean?" she scoffed, shaking her head. "You think she didn't notice how you stopped answering calls? How Surrey was too far but your pride stretched all the way there?" Mr. Jacobs, wheeled nearby by a nurse delivering tea, looked over. "She used to keep that photo of your graduation in her purse. Called you her little miracle. Showed it to every sod who'd listen." Daniel's throat tightened. The familiarity of their faces, those he'd once known as voices calling him in for tea, cheering at his GCSE results, was unbearable now. They weren't just specters of the past. They were mirrors. "She never said anything," he whispered. "She never would," Pauline muttered. "It's not her way. She just waited." A silence settled. Somewhere beyond the double doors was Maureen, his mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to get him into a world he'd used to erase her. The clock ticked. "I didn't visit at Christmas to hurt her," Catherine thought. Daniel stopped, faltering. Pauline's stare softened slightly. "You know what the worst part is? Even after that humiliation, she still spoke proud of you. Still kept that picture on the mantel and said you were busy changing the world." He covered his face. "What have I done?" "Something you can still undo," Mr. Jacobs said, sipping his tea. Gaze kind but firm. Daniel looked up, and for the first time in years he didn't see disappointment in their eyes. He saw a challenge to return, to rebuild. He nodded, barely audible. "I want to be there, for her, now." Pauline gave a slow nod. "Then start by staying." The house felt smaller than Daniel remembered. Maybe it was the silence or the way every surface bore the quiet echo of a life paused. Dust hung like old secrets on the windowsill. The air smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic, the latter left behind by the carers who'd visited Maureen during her recovery. He walked through each room slowly, keys still clenched in his palm. In the living room, the sagging armchair where Maureen used to knit faced the muted telly, still set to BBC Two. A framed picture of Daniel at his graduation stood askew on the mantelpiece beside a chipped mug, cradling spare change and loose buttons. In the kitchen, he paused. The kettle, her old metal one with the whistle still, sat on the hob, though unused. A calendar on the wall marked December, the days since her stroke left blank. Her handwriting, neat but hurried, circled dates that had long passed. Pauline's birthday, new boiler looked at, and, more hauntingly, call Daniel? He blinked, unsure why that last note felt like a wound reopening. Opening a cupboard, he found tins of baked beans, neatly stacked, just like when he was a child. It was all so modest, unchanging. He could hear her voice, soft and brisk. No need to make a fuss, as long as there's food in the cupboard and tea in the pot. Upstairs, the bedroom was spare, just a narrow bed, a side table, and a stack of paperbacks by the window. Classic British mysteries. She used to tell him as a boy that she liked stories where things made sense in the end, clues tucked away. Justice served. He spotted his old rugby ball wedged behind the wardrobe scuffed, deflated but still there. A shoebox nearby revealed old drawings, birthday cards, and a letter he wrote her from uni but never posted. He had forgotten he'd written it, or maybe chosen to. His stomach turned. How much had he missed? What had he left behind when he walked away? Downstairs, Pauline's voice called from the front door, her tone softening. "You all right, love?" Daniel swallowed hard, brushing dust from his fingertips. "No," he said honestly. "But I'm trying." The hospital room was quiet now. The machines beeped steadily beside Maureen's bed, rhythmic and indifferent. Outside the window, Manchester's gray afternoon rain tapped gently against the glass. Daniel sat motionless in the chair beside her, elbows on knees, hands clasped tight as if in prayer, though he wasn't sure he believed in anything anymore. Maureen's eyelids fluttered but did not open. Her left side lay slack beneath the blanket. He hadn't known what to expect when he walked into that room. Earlier had braced himself for anger, rejection, maybe even silence. What he hadn't prepared for was the weight of her fragility. His mother, once indestructible in his memory, looked so small. Pauline had said, "She kept a Christmas card from you. You know, the one you sent 5 years ago with just your name on it. Propped it on the mantel like it meant something." The shame twisted deeper. His phone buzzed again. Catherine. He ignored it. He'd done enough running. He leaned closer to Maureen, unsure if she could hear. "Mum," the word caught in his throat. How many times had he rehearsed apologies in his head? Flights back north that never happened, calls that went unmade. Now, all those missed chances sat with him here, unspeakable. He reached for her hand. It was rough, calloused from years of unseen work. He remembered those same hands packing his lunches, sewing buttons back on old school shirts, pulling the covers up when he'd fallen asleep studying. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. There was no response. Still, a tear slipped from the corner of Maureen's closed eye. Behind him, the door creaked. Mr. Jacobs peeked in and gave a solemn nod, carrying a thermos. "Figured you'd need a proper brew," he said, placing it beside Daniel. "She always made time for mine, no matter what her day was like." Daniel swallowed hard. "She gave everything," he murmured. Leonard nodded slowly. "Aye, and it weren't because she had to. It's 'cause she loved you." Daniel turned back to Maureen. More words hovered in his chest, trapped like birds against glass. He didn't know if he'd ever say them all, but for now, he held her hand and stayed. The car bumped gently over the cobbled crescent as Daniel pulled up outside Maureen's modest semi. The same flaking white gate, stubborn as ever, creaked open under his hand. Lily clutched her doll, peering nervously at the house. It had been weeks since the hospital discharge, but this marked their first visit since he brought her back up from Surrey. Something about that rickety gate, the moss on the front steps, and the faint smell of tea steeping behind the front door made Daniel's throat tighten. Maureen waited in the doorway, cane in hand, lips drawn in familiar reserve. Her stroke had robbed her of the quick wit that once flickered subtly behind her eyes, but not of that quiet presence, still solid and unwavering. Lily hesitated and then, without prompting, crossed the small front walk and reached for her grandmother's hand. "Gran, can I help with the kettle?" Maureen's smile was slow, uneven. She gave a tiny nod and let Lily guide her inside. Inside, Daniel lingered at the threshold of the kitchen, watching them move a little awkward, a little unsure but undeniably warm. Lily giggled as Maureen pointed mutely at the biscuit tin, a game of gestures and laughter developing between them. He watched as Maureen tapped her hand twice on the table, a silent code, and Lily responded with something close to understanding. In that moment, something long dormant unclenched within Daniel. At the kitchen table later, with the afternoon sun casting long shadows through fluttering lace curtains, Daniel cleared his throat. "I didn't know how much I'd miss this." He glanced at his daughter, and then at his mother, who met his eyes and held them, her hands gently folded. "I'm sorry, Mum, for Surrey, for everything, really." Maureen looked at him a long beat. Then she reached overhand, trembling and placed it slowly over his, squeezing once. They sat like that, neither needing to fill the silence. Outside, Mr. Prame, Jacobs shuffled past with his walking stick, giving the window a small salute. "Bit bloody late," Pauline quipped from the hallway, arms full of groceries. But better than never. She met Daniel's sheepish smile with one of her own forgiving and understood. The kettle began to whistle. Lily pressed the tea bag into her mug. Maureen nodded approvingly, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt home. The kettle clicked off just as Daniel hesitated at the sink, staring out of the small kitchen window of his childhood home. Rain tapped gently against the glass, a familiar sound he hadn't realized he missed. Behind him, Lily sat at the table coloring, her tongue tucked between her lips in deep concentration, Maureen beside her in a wheelchair, quietly watching. Silence in the room wasn't empty, it pulsed with something deeper now. Daniel poured 3 cups of tea, shaking just slightly as he added sugar to his mums. 2 for Lily, 1 for himself. He carried the tray over, and as he set it down, Maureen's hand brushed his. Tiny, cool, intentional. His chest tightened. Last night, Catherine had called again. "You've made your point," she'd said tersely. "But really, how long are you staying in that place?" He'd said nothing. For the first time in years, words failed him not because he wanted to hide but because he was finally listening to something else. He stole a glance at Maureen, who met his eyes softly. One side of her mouth curled. Her stroke left speech slow and effortful, but her gaze remained alert. Present. She reached for her cup with shaky determination. He steadied her hand. She allowed it. Pauline's voice echoed in his memory from the hospital corridor. "You don't owe anyone in Surrey half of what Maureen gave you." Catherine had made her choice. The text this morning confirmed it. A photo of his suitcase by the London door, under a note. "I can't keep doing this. We're too different." He looked at Lily, who giggled as Maureen drew a lopsided cat on her paper. The laughter sharp, unexpected broke something loose in him. Daniel reached into his coat pocket, revealing a folded letter. "Job offer," he said. "Education, charity, local." Neither Maureen nor Lily responded. They didn't need to. Daniel saw it in the way Maureen's hand gripped his, in Lily's quiet smile as she leaned into her Nan. He had left once for what he thought was a better life. Now, for the first time, he was choosing something entirely different. Something harder, something truer. The drizzle had started again as Daniel stepped out of the community center. Cold and steady. He pulled his coat tighter, remembering how Maureen used to make him wear 2 jumpers just to walk to school. A ridiculous thought, but it gave him a smile. That knew how to keep the damp out mum logic. Inside the center, tables were lined with tea urns, stale biscuits, and flyers for food drives. Mismatched chairs scraped along the tiled floors as volunteers reset for evening classes. Daniel had spent the past few weeks here organizing reading sessions, repairing old desktops, filling out grant applications. Nobody here asked for his CV. They asked if he could lift, if he had a minute to mind the kettle, if he knew how to fix the printer. Surprisingly, it felt good. Pauline waved him down from the doors, shoulders slightly hunched in her thick coat. "You're still 'ere," she said, handing him a polystyrene cup of tea. "Thought posh boys melt in the rain." He took the cup, warmth radiating into his palms. "Turns out I don't dissolve. Just took me a while to find that out." They stood for a moment under the awning, silence settling comfortably between them. Across the street, Mr. Jacobs fussed around his garden with a small rake, his flat cap bobbing between rose bushes. Daniel watched him, oddly grateful for the ordinary sight. "I always thought you were gone for good," Pauline continued, eyes still on the street. "You had the world laid out all silver forks and wine lists." "I did." He paused. "And then it snapped. Mum's stroke. It broke the picture I'd been trying to keep perfect." Pauline turned toward him, her voice gentler now. "You're mending it, lad. She knows." Inside, Lily's laughter echoed as Maureen's speech slow but patient read from a children's book. Daniel peered through the window, the two of them, cheek to cheek, each word a bridge. "She's teaching her like she taught me," Daniel whispered. "No, love," Pauline said, smiling. "You're watching her roots grow back." Daniel stared a moment longer, heart heavy but full. For the first time in years, he was standing where he'd once belonged. The soft click of Daniel's key turning in the old flat's lock stirred a strange sense of familiarity in Lily. The hall smelled different from their Surrey home, like lavender, old books, and something warm and savory trailing in from a neighbor's flat. She held her father's hand tightly, swinging her small backpack by the strap. Maureen sat in her chair by the window, crocheting a blue scarf with steady, deliberate motions. Her hands were thinner than Lily expected, her left arm still slightly curled and clumsy from the stroke. She looked over and smiled, not broadly, but gently, as if a sunflower had turned very slightly toward the light. Lily had seen this grandmother in photos, faded Polaroids on the mantel in Surrey, and one on Dad's desk, always turned slightly away from Catherine's gaze. But seeing her now, Maureen looked real. Tired, different, but real. "Hello, love," Maureen whispered, soft and cracked. "You're taller than I imagined." Lily didn't know what to say, so instead of speaking, she walked forward, reached into her backpack, and pulled out a card she'd drawn on the train. Stick figures labeled Gran, Dad, and Lily, all holding hands in front of a very crooked but hopeful house. She placed it in Maureen's lap and waited. Maureen brought a knotted hand to her mouth, holding in something: grief, laughter, thankfulness. Lily couldn't know exactly, but then Maureen patted the armrest beside her. Lily climbed up, sitting so their shoulders touched. In the weeks that followed, Lily learned to listen in silence. She helped feed the birds with old Mr. Jacobs and tried Maureen's treacle pudding. She learned Maureen's favorite song was Waterloo Sunset, and that the cat across the road was not to be trusted. They laughed often, in an understated way, like they were both discovering a secret language. Daniel watched these small moments from the kitchen doorway, tea in hand, something slipping back into place inside him. Lily began calling her Gran, without being told to. Not because of obligation, but because, in Maureen's quiet presence, she felt held, whole. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like maybe he did too. The sun hung low over the terraced rooftops of Manchester, casting golden light across the quiet street where Maureen Clark had lived her entire adult life. Daniel stood outside her house, Lily's small hand tucked into his. The garden was overgrown, but familiar. A faint smell of lavender came through the cracked window, Maureen's favorite air freshener. Inside, Pauline fussed over a kettle while Lily perched on the edge of the couch beside her grandmother, who sat with a dignified stiffness, her walking stick close by. Despite the slurred speech that still lingered from the stroke, Maureen's eyes danced at Lily's chatter about school and a role in an upcoming play. Daniel hovered by the doorway, watching their easy comfort with a mix of reverence and regret. This was what he'd walked away from. Not just Maureen, but a language of love spoken through simplicity. Where his youth was once a burden he tried to outgrow, it had now become his anchor. That evening, he walked Maureen through the community center she'd helped fund years ago, a modest brick building, humming with local kids. Some remembered him, most didn't. "Your mum," one woman told him, "she saved my son from heading down a bad path." The praise was casual, threaded through conversations like something assumed. It both warmed and humbled him. At home, Daniel cooked badly. Maureen smiled through overboiled potatoes while Lily giggled uncontrollably. When Pauline stopped by with groceries, she found them at the table, laughing in shared absurdity. "Now there's a sight," she said dryly, leaning in for a kiss on Maureen's cheek. Months passed. Catherine's messages became terse, then infrequent. Eventually, silence. Daniel didn't resist it. Instead, he leaned into the rhythm of northern skies and Lily's bedtime stories, of Maureen's cautious steps restored with physio and care. One wintry afternoon, as Lily took Maureen's hand before going on stage for the school play, Daniel sat in the crowd beside Pauline and old Mr. Jacobs. The lights dimmed, the curtain rose. Maureen reached for Daniel's hand, squeezed once. He turned and met her eyes still sharp, still proud. He didn't need words to understand. They were both, after all this time, finding their way home